This is the second Congressional Democratic Debate, brought to you by KATV and Talk Business and Politics. Now, from the Channel 7 studio, your host, Chris May.
And a very good evening to you. Welcome to this Your Voice, Your Future congressional debate. We're glad to have you with us tonight. For the next hour, we will hear from the four Democrats hoping to become their party's nominee for Arkansas's 2nd congressional district seat, a seat now held by Republican French Hill, who is seeking re-election. The candidates with us tonight are Gwen Combs, Clarke Tucker, Jonathan Dunkley, and Paul Spencer. Tonight's debate is brought to you by KATV Channel 7 and Talk Business and Politics. The candidates will answer questions about both domestic and foreign policy from Talk Business and Politics Editor-in-Chief Roby Brock and KATV's Chief Political Correspondent and Weekend Anchor Janelle Lilly. The candidates have not seen the questions in advance. Each will be given 2 minutes in which to answer, and I'll do my best to keep them to that time. The candidates have agreed not to interrupt one another, but they will be allowed to respond to a challenge on their own time. The questions will be asked in an order that was determined by a random lottery earlier tonight. The candidates will then end the debate with their closing statements, and they'll begin the debate right now with their opening remarks. First up, Gwen Combs. Ms. Combs, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chris, Janelle, and Roby. I'd like to thank KATV for hosting tonight, and I'd like to thank Sinclair Broadcast for deviating from biased programming to allow an unscripted debate tonight. My name is Gwen Combs, and I am a fighter. I believe in fighting for the people, and I believe that we need people in Arkansas or in Washington who have their priorities straight. My priorities put Arkansans first and include accessible, affordable health care, public education that is first class from pre-K all the way through employability, and also financial security for singles, families, and seniors. I'm running because I believe in government of the people and for the people, and that we just don't have that in Washington right now. We deserve to have a seat at the table, and that includes women, people of color, people with disabilities, and people who are of the LGBTQ community in order to have the best possible representation. I hope that you will consider me for your vote, and I am excited to be here tonight.
Ms. Combs, thank you so much. Mr. Tucker.
Well, thank you, Chris. Thanks also to Janelle and Roby for hosting KATV and Talk Business. I also want to thank Gwen, Jonathan, and Paul for being here tonight to engage in this important discussion. My name is Clarke Tucker. I'm a proud 7th generation Arkansan. I grew up right here in Central Arkansas, graduated from Little Rock Central. This community and my family is so central to who I am that I moved home immediately after graduating from law school in Fayetteville. My wife, Tony, and I now raise our 2 kids on the same block I grew up on. For the last 4 years, I've served in the Arkansas legislature, and I'm proud of the work I've done to stand up for Arkansas families. I've helped write and pass critical legislation to provide access to 300,000 Arkansans to health care, to increase funding for high-quality pre-K, to reform our criminal justice system, to create a paid maternity leave program, and to help take better care of our veterans and military retirees. I've done all this work in a Republican supermajority legislature because I have worked to build trust and build relationships with members of both parties to actually get something done for the people I represent. Last year, my life changed forever. The fight for affordable quality health care became a personal reality for me. I woke up from a routine medical exam to my wife doing her best to hold back tears, telling me that I'd been diagnosed with cancer. Now, I'm very grateful to be able to say today that I'm 100% cancer-free. But my diagnosis took place just a few months after our own Congressman, French Hill, went to Washington and helped pass the American Health Care Act. This piece of legislation virtually stripped away access to health care for millions of Americans and Arkansans, especially people who are poor, who don't know how to work the system, or who have a pre-existing condition like myself. They passed that bill, and then afterward they celebrated about it in the Rose Garden. It's time for a new generation to stand up and take the lead in Washington, restore courage, heart, and decency to our government. That's why I'm running. That's why I'm on this stage tonight. I'm really excited to be here, and I look forward to an honest discussion tonight.
Mr. Tucker, thank you so much. Mr. Dunkley.
Good evening. I've been looking forward to being on this stage here with everyone involved in the 2nd Congressional District race. Special thanks to Roby, Janelle, Chris, and KATV and Talk Business and Politics for allowing an opportunity for the voters to have a true chance to get a sense of what the field of candidates offers. Of all of the great congressional candidates you have up here tonight, I want to convey to you that I am the most progressive. I am a winner, not just a fighter. We win. And we get things accomplished on behalf of the people. That's all I've done as a professional here in this community. That's all I'll continue to do as I go to Washington and represent your interests. Before I go any further, though, I have to thank my wife, my daughters, Isabella, Victoria, my mother-in-law. I am thrilled to be in this position, and I can't do this and wouldn't be in this position without my family and without my friends. The money we've raised from all over this country to be able to pay the filing fee and to be here tonight has come from our friends and our families who understand what we're about. And what are we about? My daughter asked me one morning, I was doing her hair, getting ready for school, and she said, what are you doing to make the world a better place? And I said, well, Isabella, I haven't had my cup of coffee yet, but in addition to raising you and your sister, in addition to working at a graduate school here in town as a director of operations, in addition to running a mentoring program where we work with the young people now to make sure that they can actualize their best version of themselves, to going to Belize and doing service work with college students all over this world so that they can know that they can serve others and they can give back now. And so that's what I'm doing. And she looked at me as only a 9-year-old could and said, that's not enough. Trump's our president. You know what? She's right. And there's more for us to do. And that's why I've entered this race. Not only so I can provide my children with the best future available, but the young people here in this district, the hardworking women and children here in this district. I want you to know that it's been a long time coming, but you have a representative in John Dunkley. Vote DunkleyAR.com. Join our campaign, contribute, donate. We're looking forward to, again, showcasing why we are the most progressive and why we deserve your vote and are the most viable candidate going into November. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Dunkley, our thanks to you. Mr. Spencer, 2 minutes.
Thank you. I've been in Arkansas for 20 years now, and I'm a small businessman, and I have a pecan farm here in central Arkansas. I've taught at Little Rock Catholic for 19 years, and I've engaged in a lot of money out of politics activism throughout the years. And I'm proud of all those things, but I don't believe that that's enough when it comes time to ask the people of the 2nd District to make me their representative. I think we need to offer more than just who I am or who I am and going to be and who I was and so forth. And we really need to focus on the needs of the people of the 2nd District. Identity is a wonderful thing, but it can't trump good common sense legislation. And as we worked in activism throughout the years here in Arkansas, the thing that drove us forward and me forward was the fact that the people of the 2nd District are woefully underrepresented. And that's a trend that's not only occurred since Representative Hill took control of the 2nd District in Congress, but it's an ongoing process. So we offer ideas that are founded not out of anger for the current administration, though we share a lot of frustration with folks that that are frustrated by this administration. But being angry isn't enough. And having ideas that are born of common sense, decency, and a wish that everybody can share in the prosperity that is the United States is what we're about, and that's what we're going to be advocating. So I thank you for this opportunity to be here tonight and look forward to answering your questions.
Okay, our thanks to you all. It is time now to move on to the question and answer portion of this debate. The first question will be directed to Clarke Tucker. It will come from our Janelle Lilly. Janelle?
Thanks, Chris. Well, the average wait time at the VA facilities around the country is about 100 days. Additionally, some veterans who receive necessary care through the VA Choice program complain about slow reimbursement rates and overly technical issues with paperwork and bureaucracy in the VA that result in those veterans having to pay out of pocket. So, the recent departure of David Shulkin from the VA sparked a debate about privatization. This is a two-part question. First, would you support privatization of the VA? And second, if not, what changes would you push for in Congress to address the issues of access to care and slow reimbursements?
Well, thank you, Janelle, and I want to thank y'all for the opportunity to have the first question first. I feel like I got lucky on that. Well, first of all, I just want to say, as I mentioned in my open, I think it's extremely important for us to help take care of our veterans and military retirees. I have worked on that in the state legislature, both by passing a bill to help veterans move into civilian jobs and a veterans tax cut. But for as the VA, specifically to your question, I would be very hesitant to privatize the VA. I think it's important for it to stay in the public sphere. I think every veteran ought to have access to high quality care. Obviously, affordability is not an issue with the VA. I think we need some changes to our healthcare system as a whole. We had some significant progress with access to care with the Affordable Care Act. There still are some gaps in coverage for the public in general, and costs are too high. And I think some of the changes we can make for the general public should be open to veterans as well. I'm open to a policy that's on the Senate floor right now that would allow the general public to buy into Medicare on a one-on-one basis, to opt in essentially. And I think that is something that we should open up to veterans. It creates competition and allows people to have choices in their health care. It drives quality up and affordability down. So that's one approach that I would take, open that up to veterans as well. But for the most part, I think there would be some concerns with privatizing the VA. And as he said on his way out, it shouldn't be this hard to serve your country. When our veterans and military retirees come home, we ought to take care of them. That ought to be a top priority, and that will be a top priority for me in Congress.
Okay, talking about David Shulkin. Mr. Dunkley, your thoughts on the VA privatization and changes that you would make to improve service?
Thanks again, Janelle, for an excellent question. Again, veterans are central to my heart. Friends, family members have served our country well. When they come home, it's my belief that they need access that isn't cumbersome. And so I certainly wouldn't look at privatizing the VA, because our campaign focuses on people-centered practices and policies. I can't imagine that privatizing and adding a profit motive would better serve our veterans. So absolutely not would be my response to privatization of VA. And I think, again, we need to look at Medicare for all. That's one of the options I believe that we can open up for all of our veterans and members of our community here in the second and throughout this country, and so that veterans have an option to be served and not have to go through, again, cumbersome processes.
Okay, Mr. Spencer.
Privatization, that's a great question, thank you. Privatization is something that I would not vote for. A lot of folks talk about access to health care. Access to health care isn't what we need to have. We need to have the ability for people to get the health care and it be affordable, free. It needs to be free at the point of service. So I would be hesitant to move towards any program that would simply provide access without the ability for people to afford the health care. Like Jonathan, I've been espousing health care, Medicare for all, single payer, since the beginning of our campaign in June, and actually advocated for that for years prior. We look at some of the current offerings coming out of the House. 676, the House resolution is a very good program. We believe there are some places that those things can be approved on, but you know, it can't be diminished that our veterans do deserve excellent treatment, but every American in reality should have excellent treatment and not just access to it.
Ms. Combs.
Thank you so much for a question that's dear to my heart, Janelle. As a military veteran, the only veteran running for Congress in the 2nd District, it is of absolute concern to me that veterans have the most beneficial care that they can receive. Not only access, not only affordability, but quality of care, and that choice component is so critical. While I do believe that privatizing and introducing the concept of competition is not necessarily the best thing, I do think that it's important for veterans to be able to exercise their choice in who provides their care and how soon they can get to it, how much it costs, and other issues. When a veteran seeks care and there is a delay in those services, it can be life-threatening. When a veteran seeks care and there are costs associated with exercising that choice, it can be debilitating on a limited income. I want my son, I want my students, I want your kids and your grandkids to be as proud to serve this country in whatever way they choose, as I was when I enlisted in the Air Force and chose to serve overseas. And that includes providing services such as health care for the life of the veteran.
Okay, 2 candidates supporting Medicare for all or single payer. Is there anyone on the panel who opposes single payer health care or Medicare for all? Anyone?
I'm also in favor of universal health care.
Just to add in with what I would say, right now there are 150 million or more Americans who receive health insurance through their employer, and I think there are a lot of Americans who like that coverage and like that benefit that they get. And I would be hesitant to move to a system that displaces that entirely. I think the proposal that I mentioned where every American has the option to opt in to a Medicare and it adds services, Obviously, Medicare typically does not cover pediatric and maternal care. It would cover additional services like that. So it does provide universal access to care where people do have the care that they need. It would be affordable. It does create competition. It gives people choices. I like for people to have choices in the health care that they receive, and it would, I believe, drive quality up and cost down.
If I could respond, please. This is one of those concerns I think we have when we're looking for our representation, someone who understands the issues and the way that we live and experience them. Very few people like the health insurance that they get from their employers. It's a part of the package. Many people, they don't even seek other opportunities for employment because they're tied to the health insurance. So we're looking for a way for people to be free and have choices and not these archaic systems where you tie your health care to your job.
Okay, the second question comes from Roby Brock, and it goes to Jonathan Dunkley. Roby.
All right, Jonathan, I'm going to come to you first on. We're going to talk taxes. There was a big tax cut bill that split pretty much along party lines towards the end of last year. Derided by most Democrats, runs up, apparently, according to the Congressional Budget Office, a whole lot of debt. What do you support in terms of tax cuts? What do you support in terms of tax increases? Is there anything specifically that you would advocate if you were elected to Congress on either of those sides of the equation, tax cuts or tax increases?
Thanks, Roby. When we talk about taxes, I know, like myself, most Americans feel like we pay too many taxes already. So I'd be really reluctant to look at any increases. The only increases I can look for is from pro-cannabis, from the medicinal industry that's coming on board, where we can look at taxing this new emerging industry and figure out how we generate income there. Aside from taxing medical cannabis, I don't look to increase taxes in any way. Outside of that, I think if there are appropriate cuts to be made that don't impact our economy adversely and don't impact our ability to take care of roads and schools and the public good that we need, then we can look at those cuts. But right now, off the top of my head, I don't think of any of those that I can name for you right now. But I think absolutely when we talk about generating revenue to support some of the programs I'm discussing, when we talk about access and affordability of health care, access and affordability for educational programs, we can look at generating revenue from pro-cannabis.
Mr. Spencer, new taxes or new tax cuts? Which do you prefer?
Thank you for the question. We heard a lot from the Republican Congress with regards to health care for years talking about repealing and replacing. I think this should be a priority of progressives and Democrats and people, regardless of their political stripes, to repeal and replace this tax cut. This is an abomination. We can find $800 billion to fund the military, but we can't fund decent roads in this country or a decent healthcare system. So my proposal would be go back to a progressive tax system that we used to have. You got to remember that during the Eisenhower administration, I believe the tax bracket on the wealthiest Americans was something like 91%. So when I pay more in taxes or the same tax rate as a high school teacher, as millionaires, I think there's something wrong with our tax system. Furthermore, you know, we do hear a lot from Congress about being fiscally responsible. This was the height of fiscal irresponsibility. And at the same time, we're cutting people's health care. At the same time, we're saying that we don't have enough money and we don't have the ability to help people who are suffering and can't get the care that they need. We're giving billionaires a beautiful tax break. And somebody's going to pay for that in the future. And unfortunately, it's not going to be them. It's going to be the people with the 80% of the bottom earners of this country. So I think we really need to rethink where we go with our taxes. And we really need to get back to a progressive, fair, and decent tax policy.
Okay, he calls the Trump tax cuts an abomination. Do you agree or disagree?
I do agree that the tax cuts are an abomination. I believe that taxes are a personal responsibility that we have. But I think that corporations also have a huge responsibility in this. We are at a point in American history where the wealth gap is expansive. There's a huge difference between what a person makes and a corporation makes. And those corporate profits are being built on the backs of hardworking Arkansans and Americans across the country. We need to consider repealing the tax cuts for corporations. If you look at GDP around the world and average what is appropriate for a country to be competitive, 25.5% is appropriate for a corporate tax rate. And we're below that now, and it's a disgrace when we have people who don't have the health care that they need and we have employers who don't provide the health care that their employees need. That's a disgrace. I think that we have the personal responsibility for paying taxes. As an educator, I see the importance of our tax monies every day, but we also need to look at where those taxes are coming from, what the source is. As a veteran, I can also say that even though I am 100% in favor of our veterans and of our military members, it's concerning to look at the amount of money that's being spent on nuclear armament. I think that's an area where we can reduce some expenditures and move that over into areas where our taxes are benefiting people instead of harming people.
Mr. Tucker, would you vote to repeal the Trump tax cuts? Were you the congressman from the 2nd District?
I think when it comes to tax policy, it's a matter of priorities. As I mentioned, when I was in the state legislature, I voted for a tax cut to exempt military retirement income from income taxes in Arkansas. I also voted for a tax cut for middle-class Arkansans who earn $75,000 and below. Those are the same priorities that I would have in Congress. Recently, we've seen in the news the widows tax, and I would fully support repealing that. It's a tax that widows of military veterans receive just by virtue of getting 2 benefits. That's wrong. I think we ought to repeal that, so that's one example of a tax cut that I would support. And then the one aspect of the tax cut that they did pass that focused on middle-class Americans, I do support that part of it. At the state level, I've also supported the creation of a state-level earned income tax credit. I think we should expand that at the federal level. In the 1980s, members of both parties described that as the most pro-family, anti-poverty policy ever to come out of Congress. I would support that. As far as the rest of the tax cut that came out at the end of last year, by and large, these were handouts to America's largest corporations. I think Congress's priorities right now are different from mine. They're focused on the big guy, the companies that are monopolizing the American economy. I would focus more on the middle class, on America's small businesses. I also think it's a real concern that that policy would have created an additional $1.5 trillion to the national debt. This is a debt that we're leaving our children and grandchildren. That's wrong. We should be fiscally responsible. In the state legislature, I've only ever voted for a balanced budget. I do support having a balanced budget, and this tax cut is not the best way to get there. The other problem with the priorities is the individual tax cut, the part that I support, that's merely temporary, whereas the huge giveaways to the major corporations, those were permanent. I just think that's reflective of Congress's priorities now, whereas my priorities would be for middle-class Americans, for small businesses, and I think that's where our policies as a country ought to be when it comes to tax policy.
Okay, let's move on to our next question. It comes from Janelle Lilly, and it's directed to Paul Spencer. Janelle?
All right. Since last month's shooting at the Florida high school, a lot of states like Florida and others have taken up gun control and reform measures. Some of those include a ban on assault-style weapons, high-capacity magazines, bump stocks, raising the minimum age to purchase a gun to 21, banning a person with domestic abuse convictions from purchasing a weapon, and mandating background checks for guns purchased online or at a gun show. On a federal level, those reforms included. What, if any, would you support, and are any that you wouldn't support?
I think I would be supportive of all those measures. You know, a lot of these good firearms laws are based on Connecticut's firearms laws that were enacted after Sandy Hook. I think that common sense is the catchword that comes out of Congress these days, but what's common sense exactly? So I think we need to take a stand against assault-style rifles. I think we need to take some more aggressive policies with what we allow on the streets. The thing that I would really pursue is, it's kind of a more philosophical thing. I think we need to make it very obvious and say to the gun manufacturers and the gun lobby particularly that you can be regulated. And we need to also say that the Second Amendment isn't something that's unassailable. We treat it like it's sacrosanct, and that you can't even think about touching. I remember when talking earlier in this campaign, talking about the NRA, and people say, oh, you can't say that because you're going to lose the race, because of the NRA, if you run afoul of them, you're doomed. Well, I disagree profoundly with that. I think that people are ready for decent laws that protect decent people. The fact that you have a special interest in the NRA that funds a great deal of our congressional races, that's probably one of the most powerful lobbying groups in this country. They hold our Congress hostage. And Congress, they may not legislate without the okay of the NRA. And there's something definitely wrong. You know, we've always talked about money in politics, has been my focus for years. This is the most profound and egregious example of a special interest holding our Congress at bay. This is reminiscent of the Gilded Age. So I think we need to have very difficult discussions with folks and really establish the fact that there should be major limits placed on the types of firearms that we have, particularly the assault-style rifles. Absolutely.
Okay, Mr. Spencer, thank you very much. Ms. Combs, there are a lot of gun control advocates, but a lot of gun owners as well in Central Arkansas and in the 2nd District. What would you say to them tonight?
I would say that it's important for people to recognize that there is a lot of common sense that has to take place with this. We have to look at safety as our #1 priority. As a teacher, particularly, I think it's important for gun owners to recognize that most of the people who are talking about not wanting gun control are those who have purchased their guns through legal means, and in most cases with background checks completed. The problems are the loopholes that allow the people to have guns who are dangerous, who have dangerous mental illnesses, who have dangerous criminal histories, and who have no accountability from selling firearms from one person to another person individually. I agree with Mr. Spencer that the NRA's influence on politics is unaccountable, and it should be. I will not accept any money from the NRA, and I believe in closing a lot of those loopholes that you mentioned in your question. I also think that Dianne Feinstein's ban, the 2017 version of the ban, is a great idea. There were successes the first time a ban was instituted, and I think we need to revisit that because those are weapons similar. An AR-15 is the civilian version of the M16 that I fired when I was in the Air Force. They are designed to kill. In the Air Force, we don't call guns firearms, we call them weapons, and we do because they're deadly, and we have to treat them as if they are. I believe that repealing the Dickey Amendment is critical so that we can have some improvements in the CDC's access to researching gun violence and its prevention.
Okay, Mr. Tucker.
Just a couple years ago in my legislative district, a 7-year-old boy got hold of his aunt's pistol in her car and he fatally shot himself. When I learned of this story, it broke my heart. I looked into it and I learned that several hundred children per year in the United States accidentally fatally shoot themselves. And that's why last year I introduced a piece of legislation aimed at preventing those types of accidents from ever happening. Of course, we're all sadly aware of domestic violence situations in our society. The last year I also introduced a piece of legislation here in Arkansas that would prohibit those convicted of domestic violence from possessing or owning a firearm. That's both for spouses and dating partners, so that included boyfriends. And I can give you the statistics on it, but just on a personal level, I can't imagine being a victim of domestic abuse and knowing that my abuser has a gun within arm's reach. But as you say, Chris, I grew up in Arkansas. My dad taught me how to shoot on our family farm. I grew up hunting. I have shotguns in my home right now. This is not, the problem in America today is not with responsible gun owners like myself who just want to be able to hunt and protect their family. The problem is a failure of Congress to have the courage to pass some common sense gun safety laws that 7 or 8 or even 9 out of 10 Americans support. We have to provide some real support to the CDC to allow them to conduct some research into the causes of gun violence. We have to close the gun show loophole. We need to strengthen our criminal and mental health background checks. If someone can't fly on an airplane because they're on the FBI's terrorist watch list, they shouldn't be able to buy a gun. And the weapons of war that are designed for combat situations overseas, we have to figure out the best way to prevent those from being used on a mass scale against Americans on domestic soil, oftentimes against children. We can protect the Second Amendment at the same time that we protect American lives by passing some common sense gun safety laws. It's just a matter of having some members of Congress with the guts to make it happen.
Mr. Dunkley, the assault weapons ban that Ms. Combs mentioned from the Clinton era, would you like to see that return if you were a member of Congress?
I think the issue is a little deeper than just a piece of legislation. This is about, in my mind, senseless gun violence. This isn't about the weapons. I know we want to right now talk about the AR-15, and I'm with you all that we need to look at some of the causes behind senseless gun violence in our society. And to me, the first step is to fund the CDC appropriately, repeal the Brady Amendment, and give folks an opportunity from the federal government, from a congressional candidate, to say, look, we need to be operating from quantifiable data and not just what we feel. This is too big of an issue for it to be emotionally charged. The thing that we have to look at is data and research and say, what are some of the root causes to this? We may find through that research that we need to stop bump stops from being sold. We may find that we need to address the gun show loopholes. We may find that mental health is the key, but I think a lot of my colleagues are really just speaking from what we feel, and we need to be speaking from a place of leadership that's backed by data and research. So if we're really serious about this conversation, my wife and I were talking the other night. She was in high school in Columbine, and we've watched, and oddly enough, the Dickey Amendment's 20 years old, right? And so we've just seen senseless gun violence, and we haven't really adequately addressed it. And on this 50th anniversary of MLK, it is especially near and dear to me that one of our great leaders was taken away by what I will categorize as senseless violence. He was a peaceful man. And so I don't have these opportunities, albeit but for Dr. King's sacrifice. So I've been going way too long before saying that, so my apologies.
All right. Thank you all so much. The next Congress will face a lot of questions and challenges when it comes to foreign policy. So let's ask some questions about that. Roby's got the first question for Ms. Combs.
All right. Gwen, coming to you first here. A special counsel, Robert Mueller, is investigating potential ties between the Trump campaign, the Trump businesses, the Trump administration with Russia and Vladimir Putin. We've seen a lot of reporting, a lot of legal filings, a lot of congressional action and some congressional inaction on this front. Twofold question for you. If the Democrats take control of the House of Representatives, how would you handle being a check and balance on the Trump administration on this particular issue? And how would you be different than Representative Hill on this issue?
Check and balance is an interesting question. I think that right now we have an executive branch that is governing through tweets. And I think that we need to have a more mature, significant approach to that in the legislative branch, and I think that that's an opportunity for Congress to make some sense. Obviously, we can talk about the articles of impeachment being filed and the responsibility of Congress to handle that. And I would be absolutely in favor of supporting such a thing. I think that it's important for us to make sure that we are listening to the people when we talk about checks and balances, and that's the most important part. The second part of your question?
How would you be different than Representative Hill in terms of how you handle being a check and balance on the Trump administration?
I think it's a disgrace to hear that there are concerns about Representative Hill being connected to the issues with Russia, and I hope to have the integrity to serve the people in a way that is honorable to our country.
Okay, Mr. Tucker, as a check and balance on the administration, how would you perform?
I think really both questions can be combined into one, because I'm not sure how much of a check and balance our current congressman is providing on the administration. When it comes to the Mueller probe, specifically which you referenced, I think we have to see where the evidence comes in. We don't have all the information yet. Regardless of how that comes out, we have incontrovertible evidence that Russia meddled and interfered in the 2016 election. I think it's astonishing that our country hasn't taken more action to protect our democracy. Having free and fair elections where every person's vote counts is a central part of our country. The fact is that the administration recently introduced some sanctions against Russia for that. That was a first step. That was not strong enough. We need to be stronger. When the founders created our country, and I can't explain the president's relationship with Russia. I don't think anyone can. But I think the founders contemplated a situation where we would have a president who may have a relationship that you have difficulty understanding. But what I don't think the founders contemplated is having a Congress that did not provide a check and balance on that administration when it came up. And right now we have a failure of Congress to provide that check and balance. We need to take sanctions against Russia, stronger action than we've taken so far. And Congress also hasn't taken any action to protect international meddling, specifically from Russia in the 2018 cycle. We need to strengthen our cybersecurity for elections, make sure that no meddling will be effective and that our elections have integrity, they're free and fair, and that every single person's vote counts. And that's what I would be doing if I were in Congress right now.
Okay. Mr. Dunkley, the question is on Russia.
Russia, the way I look at it as a next congressman from the 2nd Congressional District, is we absolutely have to allow Robert Mueller and the federal government to continue the investigation unimpeded by any politics or any partisan divides. This is too serious. Like Representative Tucker, I agree. Meddling in our elections should be paramount to all of us, regardless of being Republican, Democrat. We should all take this issue very seriously. And I would say Congressman Hill has provided zero check and balance to the current administration. He's voted 100% of the time with Trump. So as long as you're voting with Trump and you're accepting money from the NRA, he's in line with their value set and what they believe in. And I don't think we have any evidence to the contrary.
Mr. Spencer, Ms. Combs brought up the specter of impeachment. Is there a basis for impeachment of this president right now?
I think it's totally premature to be talking about that. I think that every American, regardless of your station in life, from the president down to anybody else, is entitled to due process under the law. That's one of the most important features of our representative democracy, and it's guaranteed by our Constitution and state constitution. The fact that you have this, it's becoming a feeding frenzy, and it's becoming a distraction. I think if the man is guilty, and the Mueller investigation points to that, I think that steps need to be taken. But this is a serious thing. It's not just a sideshow. We're not doing this for maudlin fun or anything like that. You're talking about removing a seated president of the United States. Now, you can talk about the emoluments clause and his, alleged violations of that. I think at this point, if you wanted to even begin to broach the concept or idea of impeachment, that would be where I'd look. I think it's too premature for us to bandy around very frivolously this concept of removing a seated president. I can't say is that I'm a big fan of Mr. Trump, but I do acknowledge the fact that we have a system in place, and that system has to be followed without fail. So I would not even entertain that thought right now without seeing some evidence.
But as a check and balance on the administration, how would you perform?
I think that Congress has pretty much abrogated its responsibility to the executive branch. We've seen that since the 1960s with the Gulf of Tonkin crisis, where Congress divested itself of its authority to declare war, all through the later days with the War Powers Act. And now we see the executive branch kind of running amok. And we've seen that under several presidents. It's not just a Republican trait. And until you take the special interest money out of Congress that really muzzles them, they're not going to act decisively on anything. They're going to allow the executive branch to handle those things because the executive branch is there for a set amount of time. The Congress is there until the second coming. So it's in their best advantage to not go that route.
Okay, all right, thanks to you. Our next question comes from Janelle Lilly, and it will be directed to Clarke Tucker.
In Arkansas, we have about 10,000 individuals who have been initially or fully approved under the DACA program. Last year, President Trump ended DACA, but he gave Congress 6 months to extend those protections. But so far, there's been no deal, and it's become pretty apparent that there will not be a clean DACA bill. So if elected, would you support a bill authorizing a border wall in exchange for DACA? Or if not, what bargaining chips would you bring to the table to get DACA passed?
I think there's plenty of common ground on the issue of immigration. I'll just start by saying, a few months ago I watched a speech on Facebook of a young lady who's valedictorian in her Texas high school. And she is going to one of the most prestigious colleges in the United States. And in her valedictorian graduation speech, she made known public for the first time that she was an illegal, undocumented immigrant. She was a dreamer. And as I mentioned before, my family's been in Arkansas for a long time. Both my parents, all four of my grandparents, all 8 of my great-grandparents, and all 16 of my great-grandparents lived in Arkansas. So I consider myself to be 100% Arkansan. And this young lady who I'm speaking of, the valedictorian of her class in high school, she is 100% as American as I am. And I think it's astonishing that Congress has not taken steps yet to protect all of the dreamers in the United States, give them a path to citizenship, and keep their families intact. As for immigration in general, you referenced the border wall. I do think there's common ground. I think the overwhelming majority of Americans, including myself, want to secure the border. I think spending tens of billions of dollars on a border wall is not the best use of taxpayer dollars. I think it sends the wrong message to the world about who we are as a country, but most importantly, I don't believe, based on the research that I've seen, that it will be effective in securing our border. There are other approaches that we can take that will be effective, and I think Republicans and Democrats can work together to make that happen. I think with all of our immigration policies, we have to keep, the security of Americans intact. When people are coming into the country, there should be no religious test. That's inherently un-American, in my opinion. But we have to balance that with a recognition of who we are as a country. Unless you're Native American, we are all immigrants in this country, and immigrants have provided so much. They've contributed so much to our economy, to our culture. As I said, we are a nation of immigrants, so we need to balance the security of the country with recognizing what a valuable role immigrants play in our society. A critical part of that, first and foremost, is to protect the dreamers, and it's long overdue for Congress to work with the administration across the aisle to make that happen.
The Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, claims that he offered the president $25 billion for a wall in exchange for a DACA fix. The president turned him down. Mr. Dunkley, would you make that deal?
I don't think we need a wall to address our immigration policies. When I think about immigration, it's a personal issue for me. My father is Jamaican, and so as he tells this story, he came to this country with $1 in his pocket. I think he had a little bit more money than that, but the point's still made. So when people come here, they come here to look for opportunity, and they come here to contribute. So most of the immigrants that have come to this society, they are not characterized as the way the president speaks about them. I'm not even going to use the language he describes most of them, and it's because it's insulting. What these folks do is they come here and they look for opportunity and they contribute in our society. They help boost our economy. And these are folks, these are my neighbors, these are my friends. And so when I think about DACA and I think about the president, I say first and foremost, we need to be thinking about, one, securing the border. We have to have secure borders, but most of the immigrants that come to our country aren't parading across the border. I know that's what's on Fox News this week, but that's not the reality. The reality is most of them overstay their visa when they fly here to this country. And so if we are serious about addressing these issues, it's not about talking points. It's about developing clear, concise policy. So those folks that we have here, we're not going to get them out of the country, right? We're not going to export 20 million people. So how are we going to address it? And I think we just need to develop a clear path to citizenship for folks. And these folks that are dreamers, I'm one of them. I'm right there with them. And so we'll do everything we can from the federal seat to make certain that we get a better deal that the president will accept.
Mr. Spencer, how do you get to a DACA deal?
Well, firstly, I have to take major exception to the way that the question was kind of phrased first, not on your part, but the fact that you negotiate a trade deal, you negotiate a tariff, you negotiate tax. You don't negotiate when it comes to human beings. So it's crass and vile that people that run this country would use these children as a bargaining chip to get a wall. I think that's a sign that we've denigrated to something far beyond what I recognize as being an American citizen and what the Constitution upholds. We have a human right to migrate. It's a human right. Now, that doesn't mean we throw open the borders and let everybody in that wants to come in. There needs to be sensible ways of regulating the people that cross our borders. But you know, in U.S. history today, we talked about the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 and how you're singling out specific ethnicities or nationalities of people. We don't need to go in that direction. We've already kind of broached that a little bit with the travel ban. So with regards to DACA, though, I think it's just an abomination to even consider that we would use a wall when talking about human lives. So that's the first part of that. Now, every person has an intrinsic value to them. And we as legislators, those of us who become legislators or those of us who have been legislators, I don't believe that this current Congress view that humanity. I think that a lot in Congress today sees humanity as a commodity that's sold to the highest bidder with regards to wages and taxes and health care. We're basically herded from point A to point B. So that is consistent with what we see with this senseless idea that you can trade something for human lives.
Okay. Ms. Combs, without a deal, though, these protections that these DACA recipients have had, they do disappear. What would you do on their behalf?
I think it's important to recognize that humans aren't bargaining chips. When we talk about the dreamers, we need to have a Clean Dream Act that does allow a pathway to citizenship for people who have been here all of their lives that they've known. It's important to recognize that families are an important support structure for those individuals and that they are important members of our society. They're in our communities, in our schools, and in most cases, communities that have high populations of immigrants are actually safer to live in because people are concerned about being upstanding citizens and making sure that they don't violate the terms of their DACA or take other risks. It's important to work tirelessly on their behalf. I am not in favor of a border wall. I think it's a careless expenditure that's unnecessary and irresponsible if we want to talk about fiscal responsibility.
Okay, our next question on foreign policy comes from Roby Brock. And Roby, we'll begin with Mr. Dunkley.
All right, Jonathan, the Trump administration has imposed tariffs on steel coming into the U.S. That has led to retaliation from many countries, including China, which we saw China today actually retaliated with tariffs on soybeans, a huge commodity crop here in Arkansas. Kind of a twofold question for you. Do you support or oppose this change we're seeing in U.S. tariff policy that the president's undertaking? If not, how would you halt the administration's efforts on this front?
Good deal. From what I can understand about the steel tariffs, particularly here in Arkansas, we import this steel because we can't cheaply produce it here. And so that's not something I think 45 is aware of. When he's making these negotiations and he's talking about adding tariffs, I think we got to get away from this unilateral approach as if we're the only nation on the planet that can add our own tariffs. And we saw China retaliate. And so we're going to see real cost from this. And so it's not as simply as the President Trump tweeting something or really not thinking through his policies. It's detrimental to the hardworking families here in this district. And so we won't see it today, but over time, if we keep with this, I'm going to add tariffs to this product and other countries retaliate, we're going to see an increase in our goods. And I think, as you mentioned, soybeans, cotton, rice, those are major products here in this state, and we can't approach these problems in this way. I think we have to take a much more sensible approach, and I think, honestly, it just comes down to a lack of respect that this administration is showing for other world leaders, and it's un-American. This is not what our country is built on, to speak to other world leaders in this way and to demand kind of this braggadocio approach. And I think that's who Trump is, but I don't think it's good business for the American people. I think over time we'll see that there are ramifications for this kind of tough talk.
45, of course, the 45th president, Donald Trump, just so everyone knows. Mr. Spencer.
Fantastic. I was born in a steel town in the Upper Ohio Valley near Pittsburgh. So, you know, we grew up with steel as an ever-present symbol of our lives at the Pittsburgh Steelers area. Everything steel, 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 tin mills, everything. A lot of my family were immigrants and worked in those steel mills. Others worked in the coal mines that fired those plants to make the iron that won the Second World War and the First World War for this country. We have lost a little bit of a competitive edge with regard to steel, but I think the drastic approach of Mr. Trump supersedes that. It's beyond what needs to happen. A lot of this, you know, I have to use the same word that Jonathan used, there's a lot of braggadocio coming out of the White House, and there's a lot of unilateralism with regards to we're going to take the response and start changing the shape of the world by our actions here because of a whim, seemingly a whim. I can't for the life of me see any premeditation on this at all. The tariffs the restrictions that were posed back on the United States hit agricultural states like Arkansas, and that was the plan of the Chinese because they know that rural states like Arkansas supported Mr. Trump, so why not go after the industries that are going to harm those very supporters? So this quid pro quo is very dangerous. It's very dangerous for Arkansas. It's very dangerous for the United States. It's very dangerous for other countries of the world. And we also need to understand that Congress should have a position in this. You know, the Article 1 of the Constitution talks about how the House of Representatives, it's the people's house. And when it comes to declaring war, levying taxes, and things that affect the prosperity of the people of this country, the people need to have a say in that. It's just not something that we do because we feel like making ourselves look bigger than everybody else. So it needs to be more thoughtful, and the Congress, the current administration and the Congress, needs to stand up for those values that are ensconced in the Constitution.
The White House would say that we've been getting ripped off. That's how President Trump ran, and that these tariffs are kind of the opening salvo to get a better negotiating position down the line. Is that the wrong way to go, Ms. Combs?
I oppose the tariffs. China has unleveled the playing field in the past, but it is not as exaggerated as the current administration would lead us to believe. The tariffs put us in a situation where some of our most needy and also most hardworking people are being injured. People who are in agriculture, people who are in manufacturing are being hurt through this process. So the current administration is hurting its very own supporters by imposing the tariff. I think it's important to recognize that not only with the tariff, but with other international policy, we have a tweet storm of antagonizing actions that are putting us in jeopardy, that jeopardize my fellow service members, that jeopardize people like my son who are of a draft age, and we have to worry about these things when we are under the administration of such volatility.
Okay. Mr. Tucker, what do you do about trade?
As a principle, I do support free trade, but I also support fair trade. It's a complex issue. It's hard to boil down to a soundbite. Just to start from the beginning with the steel tariffs that the president imposed, I was communicating with a steel worker earlier this week, and he made me aware that since 2000, we've lost 64,000 steel worker jobs in this country. That's not just a number that affects 64,000 American families. I think it's important to remember that. It's also important to remember that China doesn't always play by the rules. We need to be firm with China, but also fair. All that said, I don't believe that the current approach, I do believe it's misguided. I don't think it's the right approach. As Roby, you mentioned, we already have retaliation from China that's going to affect Arkansans. Soybeans in particular was targeted today. That's actually the #1 row crop in Arkansas. The 25% tariff on soy crop reduces the value of soybeans in Arkansas by 14%. Soybeans were not the only agricultural crop targeted today. It's going to really impact the Arkansas economy in a negative way. And also, what's the end game with the tariffs and the trade war? We don't really know. We need China to be a partner with the United States in a very volatile situation with North Korea. We don't know how the trade war will affect that relationship and how that'll affect the entire world order. So I think it's important as we move forward. Free trade is here, globalization is here. I do like the idea of keeping in mind and making a priority when we approach trade of keeping in mind the American workers and the American small businesses. But at the end of the day, I do believe the current approach is misguided because of the negative impact it's going to have on Arkansans and our economy.
Okay. Our time has flown by. It's hard to believe, but we've already reached the point where we'll move on to our closing statements. We thank you all for your answers to our questions tonight. 2 minutes for a closing statement. We'll begin with Paul Spencer.
Fantastic. Thank you for putting this on. It was a good time, and it's great to be here with these other candidates. The thing that I try to remember whenever I think about how I would legislate or what I would do is that the primacy of human dignity that's intrinsic to all of us has to come first. That takes precedence over political power, the power of a party, everything. We've seen in the last several years, since 2010, we've watched the dignity of the human person be derided by bestowing personhood on corporations and the special interests that allow these groups to run roughshod all over our democracy, our republic. We need to wrest back those basic principles that one vote, one voice. We need to have a system of governance in this country that's fair to all people, that again doesn't treat us like commodities, that doesn't treat us like bargaining chips, because we're better than that as human beings. We're better than that. Arkansas is better than that. We don't need a representative that blurs the line between humans as having dignity or a commodity, as a bargaining chip or a wage earner. We need to uphold that dignity. We need to take our current legislators to task for even allowing this to happen. It's one thing to oppose it, but to remain silent and let it occur is unconscionable. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Spencer, thank you so much. We have had an adhesive problem with Mr. Dunkley's placard, but by now we all know your name. So 2 minutes to close for John Dunkley.
Good deal. Again, I want to thank Roby Brock. I want to thank Janelle and you, Chris, and KTV and Talk Business and Politics. This has been a tremendous opportunity for us to have a conversation with the voters, and without you all, it wouldn't be possible. So this is why we're here. This is why the Democratic field that you have, everyone here is progressive in their own right. They all represent the best in themselves, and they want to represent you all well. But again, as we've debated and we've spoken tonight, I want to continue to reiterate that our campaign is about a people-centered approach. My entire professional career has been about the people that live and reside right here in the great state of Arkansas. And so we look to bring a sense of respectability back to politics that we don't currently have with 45 in office. And with our current representation, he's there voting 100% of the time with Donald Trump. And we don't think that represents truly or fully the people here in this great district. Again, my wife, my children, my great staff that's been working, Team Dunkley, I appreciate you all. And thanks again for a great opportunity to introduce ourselves to the voters. VoteDunkleyAR.com. And we look forward to seeing more of you on the campaign trail.
Mr. Dunkley, thank you so much. Clarke Tucker, 2 minutes of closing remarks, please.
Thank you again for hosting us, and thanks to my fellow candidates for being here tonight. Most important, thank you for watching. I love this country. We live in the greatest social and political experiment in the history of the world. While we have a lot of work left to do, each generation before us has stepped up, worked hard, and sacrificed to leave a better country and a better world for us. We're particularly reminded of that today, the 50th anniversary of the tragic assassination of Dr. King, and the sacrifices that Americans have made to leave us that better country. If there were ever a time for a new generation to stand up and leave that legacy for our own kids, that time is now. But it's never an easy decision to run for Congress. When I was trying to decide, one day my grandmother called me and she said, "Clarke, you need to do this for your country." When I consider the fact that she was born in 1921, she grew up in the Great Depression, has lived through World War II, Vietnam, civil rights, Watergate, everything in between and since. And she says that now is when our country needs us. It really puts into perspective what's at stake. It gets easier to run when you consider that perspective and when you recognize that this election is not about the candidates on the ballot. It's about everyone in this room. It's about everyone watching at home. It's about everyone in this district, in this state, in this country. It's about our children and their future. It's about our seniors and their dignity. It's about restoring courage, heart, and decency to the political process. It's about standing up and giving a voice to people who need something from their government and have been overlooked. It's about understanding that cancer does not have a political party. Hunger does not have a political party. Hopes and dreams do not have a political party. It's about a love of this country, about who we want to be as a people and what kind of nation we want to be. It's about making America the beacon of hope and light in the world that we have been and always should be. That's why I'm running, and that's why I'm asking your vote to be the next congressman from Arkansas's 2nd District.
Mr. Tucker, thank you very much. And to close us out tonight, Gwen Combs, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you so much for hosting. Thanks to all of the maintenance, production, accounting, everybody who made this possible. And thanks to my family, my team, and my fellow candidates. And especially to you watching at home for making this a great night. As the only woman, the only military veteran, and the only public educator running for this seat, I have a really unique perspective to be able to represent everyday Arkansans. I have a voice that can relate to almost every person I meet in some way. America needs change, and it starts right here in Arkansas. Do you want a leader who's bold? Do you want a leader who's fearless? I am here to answer the tough questions, and I am here to fight for the people. And I hope to put a face of honor and integrity on politics in a way that it hasn't been there for the last year plus. I want to ask for your vote. You can find more information at www.combsforarkansas.com. We're on social media, and I hope that you're registered to vote. Registration ends on April 23rd. Take care of that detail, and then vote Gwen Combs on May 22nd.
All right, thank you so much. And that wraps up tonight's debate. We want to thank our candidates and you for watching as well. Don't forget, the primary day in Arkansas is May 22nd. The general election is set for November 6th. We encourage you to vote and make your voice heard. Good night.